You know everyone has a plan, until they're on their hands and knees, scrubbing a toilet. I remember the day. I walked into that building for the first time not as a potential investor, but as the new night shift janitor. My suit was hanging in a closet at home, a relic from a life that had collapsed. I was wearing a pair of cheap stiff work pants and a polo shirt with a company logo that felt like a brand of shame. The air in the lobby was cold, sterile, smelling of lemon-scented disinfectant and failure. My own failures. Fortune and making everyone's job harder. I learned about the petty cash fund that was abused by the marketing team. I heard the rumors about layoffs, about mergers, about secret meetings with lawyers. I saw the flaws in our family business from this new ground-level perspective: the arrogance, the refusal to adapt, the reliance on old contracts, and a reputation that was slowly eroding. I'd listen to the apex executives talk in the hallways, their conversations casual, confident. They weren't afraid of my family's company. They saw it as a relic, a dinosaur waiting for the meteor to hit. That's when the vow solidified. It wasn't a loud, dramatic moment. It was quiet. I was on the floor scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain off the linoleum. My back ached, my hands were raw. And I looked at my reflection, distorted in the chrome of the paper towel dispenser. I made a promise to that distorted man. I would learn everything, I would save every penny, I would become stronger than they ever were. This humiliation would not be the end of my story, it would be the foundation. Years passed. The night shift became my life. I lived frugally, obsessively. Every dollar I didn't spend on rent or food went into investments. I studied the market, using the insider knowledge I gleaned from the trash cans and whiteboards of Apex. I started small, then bigger. I was patient. I was a ghost, moving silently through the world of finance, my capital growing in the shadows. And I watched my family's company from afar. I read the business reports. I saw the slow, inevitable decline, the missed opportunities, the failed product launches. The arrogance that had disowned me was the same arrogance that blinded them. They were crumbling, and they were too proud to see the cracks in their own walls. The meteor hit: a perfect storm of bad investments, a shifting market, and a competitor, Apex, that had outmaneuvered them at every turn. The company was drowning in debt. The shares, once a symbol of our birthright, were nearly worthless. They were days from insolvency. The legacy my father had built, the empire he had chosen my brother to protect, was about to vanish. That's when I made my move. I had spent a decade preparing for this moment. I formed a holding company, a shell, with a nondescript name. My lawyers contacted the board. There was an offer on the table, a single viable offer to buy the company outright, to assume its debts, and inject the capital needed to save it from dissolution. The emergency board meeting was held in the same conference room where I'd been dismissed from so many meetings, the long polished mahogany table, the portrait of my grandfather, staring down from the wall. I walked in not in a jumpsuit, but in a suit that cost more than my father's first car. The silence was absolute. My father looked older, the confidence was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion. My brother looked like he'd been punched. My uncle just stared, his mouth slightly agape. I took the seat at the head of the table, the one my father had always occupied. "You," my brother finally spat out, "this is your doing, some kind of pathetic revenge." I started a journal, not on a computer, but in a small grease-stained notebook I kept in my back pocket. At first it was just dates and times. June 14, 11:30 p.m. Overheard CFO on phone in his office mentioned cash flow tightening and delaying vendor payments. Then it became more detailed. I drew diagrams of the office layout, marking the bottlenecks. I listed names, relationships, grievances. It was all there, the complete, unvarnished truth of the company, a truth the board of directors would. I looked at him, my expression calm. "No, this is a business transaction. Your company is failing. My company is making an offer, the only offer. It's quite simple." My father found his voice. It was cracked, weak. How did you? "You told me I needed to learn what it meant to get my hands dirty," I said, my voice even so. I did. I learned everything. I learned how this company really works, and more importantly, how it doesn't. I learned it from the ground up, literally. I slid the contract across the table. The paper made a whispery sound in the dead quiet of the room. "The terms are non-negotiable. The acquisition is immediate. You have 5 minutes to decide." They had no choice. They signed away their legacy to the son, the brother they had thrown away like garbage. The power shift wasn't just financial. It was spiritual. I owned every brick, every patent, every memory in that building. I owned the name that had rejected me. After the papers were signed, I stood up. They were still sitting shell-shocked. I looked at my brother. The company will be undergoing restructuring. I said there will be a position available in the mailroom. It's an entry-level job. But it's a start. It teaches you what real work is. If you're interested, you can apply. The reversal was complete. The cowardly fool, the dreamer, the black sheep, was now the owner, the savior. But it wasn't about saving them. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The lesson was never for them. It was for me. Sometimes the greatest success isn't about building something new. It's about proving your worth by taking back what was always yours and forging a new path from the ashes of the old one. The name on the building was the same, but the foundation now was built on something they could never understand. Resilience. I remember the exact moment I saw the anomaly. It was late after 10 o'clock. The office was quiet, just the hum of the server racks and the faint glare of my triple monitors. I was running the final models on a potential acquisition target, a mid-sized industrial manufacturer named Pracy Tech. On paper, it was a dog: stagnant revenues, declining margins, a balance sheet that looked tired, over-leveraged. The consensus in the fund was a hard pass. My initial report said the same. But there was this one figure buried deep in the footnotes of their last 3 annual reports: the rate of repeat business from their top 20 clients. It was 98% in that industry. With those margin pressures, that number was an absolute outlier. It was statistically impossible, yet there it was. Never see from their polished mahogany table. I was building a blueprint from the ground up, from the literal ground. I was mopping. I ran the correlations again. I modeled every variable I could think of: pricing, market volatility, competitor activity. The numbers kept telling me the company should be shedding customers, not retaining them with near-perfect loyalty. The quantitative data was a portrait of a dying company, but this one qualitative sliver of data was a heartbeat in a corpse. It didn't add up. My screen was a chessboard of red and black figures, and this one piece, this queen, was moving in a way that broke all the rules. I took it to my direct superior, Sarah Chen. I laid it out for her: the anomaly, the dissonance. I said the numbers were telling a lie, or at least they were missing a fundamental truth. Her response was a tired smile. She said, "Models aren't perfect, James, but they're all we have." She called it a ghost in the machine, a rounding error that my sleep-deprived brain was latching onto. The meeting was over in 5 minutes. The next day I went to the partners. I presented the same data. I argued that our entire due diligence process was reactive, backward-looking. We were forensic accountants dissecting a body. After it was cold, I told them we needed to understand the company's present vitality, its immune system. That's when I pitched it the radical idea. I proposed taking a 3-week sabbatical. I would go to the city where Pracy Tech's main plant was located. I wouldn't just interview management. I would go undercover, get a job on the floor, see the real engine of the company. The laughter wasn't loud or cruel. It was worse. It was a polite, dismissive chuckle from Robert Holloway, the senior partner. He leaned back in his $30,000 chair and said, "You want to be a secret agent, James? This isn't a spy novel. We manage $8 billion. Our due diligence is priced in. We don't mop floors for alpha." He said my idea was quaint, a relic of a bygone era before big data. They voted unanimously to pass on the investment. The case was closed. I couldn't let it go. That anomaly was a splinter in my mind, so I did it anyway. I used my vacation time. I flew out to Indiana, bought a pair of work boots from a local store, and applied for a janitorial position at Pracy Tech. The interview was with a harried shift supervisor who barely looked at my falsified resume. He asked if I could push a broom and not steal anything. I said yes. He said I started the next day. My hedge fund was analyzing credit default swaps. I was being taught the proper technique for cleaning a urinal. It felt like the most sophisticated research I had ever undertaken. The first thing that struck me was the silence on the production floor. It wasn't the dead silence of a failing operation. It was the quiet hum of intense focus. The machines, older than I expected, were impeccably maintained. They gleamed. I saw maintenance logs that were filled out with a level of detail that was almost obsessive. During my breaks, I'd sit in the corner of the massive break room, just listening. I heard the conversations. They weren't about sports or television. They were about tolerances, about a vibration in a hydraulic press on line 42. Machinists, their hands stained with grease, arguing passionately about a modification. One of them had made to a jig a modification that had reduced waste by 2%. This wasn't a top-down initiative, this was a grassroots organic culture of excellence. I saw the CEO once he walked the floor in a hard hat and safety glasses, not a suit. He knew the workers by their first names. He asked Phillies on the assembly line about her son's baseball game. This was not a company being bled dry by private equity. This was a family and organism. The real turning point came about 8 months in. I was cleaning Reynolds' office, late one night. He always left a mess. I was emptying his wastebasket, and under a stack of financial periodicals, I saw a corner of a familiar-looking document. It was from a commercial real estate firm. My heart started to hammer in my chest. I carefully lifted the magazines. It was a preliminary listing agreement. The building the whole company was being quietly put on the market. The reason was right there in the But I also saw the red flags, the things no auditor's report could ever capture. I saw the petty fiefdoms among middle management. One floor supervisor, a man named Dave, was a tyrant. He ruled by fear. And the productivity in his section was noticeably lower, the morale brittle. I overheard 2 accountants in the main office, which I cleaned after hours, talking in hushed tones about the Sheffield account. They mentioned contingent liabilities and verbal agreements that weren't in the official records. It sounded like a potential lawsuit waiting to happen, a multimillion-dollar liability that was completely off the books. I saw the dirt, literally, and in that dirt I found the truth. The quantitative data was right about the symptoms, the high debt, the squeezed margins. But it was completely blind to the cause, and more importantly, the potential. The margins were squeezed because they were pouring cash into R&D for a proprietary calibration process for their core product. It was undocumented, a trade secret, held in the heads of a few senior engineers, the loyalty of their customers. It was because the quality was unsurpassed. A quality born from that obsessive maintenance and worker pride. The company was a diamond, covered in mud. The spreadsheets only saw the mud. I came back after 3 weeks. I was 20 pounds lighter, and my worldview was shattered. I wrote a new report. It was 40 pages long. It had no complex algorithms. It had quotes from line workers. It had diagrams of the shop floor flow I had mapped out. It detailed the cultural strengths, the hidden innovation, the specific management risks, and the off-balance sheet legal threat. I concluded that Pracy Tech was, despite its financial appearance, one of the most robust and undervalued companies I had ever seen. The latent potential was enormous. I presented it to the partnership. The reception was ice. Holloway skimmed the first page. He called it an interesting travelogue. He said my job was to analyze financial statements, not write anthropological studies. He said the fund's position was unchanged. My field research was dismissed as anecdotal, unscientific, uninvestable. That was the moment of decision. I had a choice: fall in line with the quantitative consensus, or trust the evidence of my own eyes. I trusted my eyes. I liquidated my entire portfolio, my savings, my bonus, everything. I took a second mortgage on my apartment. I maxed out every line of credit I could access. It was terrifying. I was betting my entire financial life on the insights I gained from pushing a cleaning cart and listening to machinists. I found a separate backer, a small family office that was more flexible, more willing to listen to a narrative. I showed them my report. They were intrigued by the qualitative edge. They matched my capital together. We took a significant quiet position in Pracy Tech stock. It was trading at a discount, in anticipation of a continued slide. Then the truth began to emerge, just as my research had predicted. First, a trade publication ran a profile on an unsung hero of manufacturing, which turned out to be Pracy Tech, praising its unbelievable quality standards. The stock ticked up 5%. Then they quietly settled the Sheffield lawsuit. The liability was real, but it was a fraction of what the market had feared, because their internal legal team, another thing I had noted, was excellent, had mitigated the damage. The stock jumped. Another print owner seeking exit due to persistent liquidity challenges and underperforming assets. Liquidity challenges. I'd been watching those challenges play out in late payments to the cleaning supply company I ordered from underperforming assets. I'd been dusting those assets every night. 10%. The real catalyst came 6 months later. They announced the launch of their new proprietary process. It revolutionized their efficiency, sending their margins soaring past all competitors. The analysts who had dismissed them were scrambling. The stock didn't just climb, It exploded. It quadrupled in value over the next year. My entire net worth turned into just over $10 million in profit. The fund I worked for had missed it completely. They were still looking at the old models the day the major news broke. Robert Holloway called me into his office. The atmosphere was different. The condescension was gone, replaced by a cold professional respect. He didn't apologize, he just looked at me and said, "It seems you found a different kind of data stream, James." That was the validation. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about proving that the world isn't just a collection of numbers. A business is a living, breathing entity. Its value isn't just in its assets or its income statement. It's in the pride of a worker who stays late to polish a machine. It's in the quiet conversation between engineers solving a problem no one else knows exists. It's in the culture that either fosters excellence or breeds complacency. My philosophy now is simple. To truly understand a business, you have to understand its soul. And you don't find a company's soul in a boardroom or a spreadsheet. You find it on the factory floor. You find it in the breakroom conversations. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty. Because sometimes the most valuable data point isn't a number on a screen. It's the gleam on a well-oiled machine, or the determined look in a janitor's eye who is seeing everything. I used to have this office, a corner office on the third icon floor. The windows were fluorescent glass, and the view, it was a view of the entire city laid out at my feet. I had the polished desk, the expensive chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My name was on the door in big bold letters. Vice President. People would walk by, and their pace would change. They'd stand up a little straighter. My suits were tailored. My watch was a statement. I thought I had built a fortress around myself made of money and titles and respect. I thought it was real. The collapse didn't happen overnight, but it felt like it. It was a chain reaction, a bad investment, a betrayal by a partner I'd trusted for years, a market shift I was too arrogant to see coming. The phone calls stopped being congratulatory. They became tense, hushed. The emails were full of red numbers. And then the silence. The final meeting was in a boardroom I used to command. This time, I was on the other side of the table. The words were clinical, legal, liquidation, bankruptcy, dissolution. They might as well have said erasure. I walked out of that building with a single box. The watch was gone, sold. The suit felt like a costume I'd forgotten to take off. The months that followed were a blur of gray. I'd sit in my small dark apartment, which was all I could afford, and scroll through job listings on my laptop. My resume, which used to open doors, now seemed to close them. Overqualified. That's what they all said. It's a polite word for threat. I was a threat to the people who would be my bosses. I knew too much. I had been too high. My savings evaporated. The shame was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest. I'd see my reflection in a shop window and not recognize. That was my moment, the opportunity. All that intelligence I'd gathered wasn't just academic anymore. It was a weapon. I spent the next 2 weeks refining my notes, structuring the information into a proper business case. I knew exactly what the company was worth. And more importantly, I knew it was worth far less than Reynolds thought. I knew where the fat was, where the inefficiencies were, where the morale was broken. I could see the path to profitability with painful clarity. The man staring back. The day I walked into the temp agency, the air was thick with despair. It was a different world. People clutching folders, hoping for a few hours of data entry. I filled out the form with a pen that barely worked. The woman behind the counter looked at my history, then looked at me. Her expression was flat, tired. She said they had one consistent placement. It wasn't glamorous. It was nights janitorial services for the very office tower I used to work in. I felt my face get hot. The humiliation was so acute. I thought I might be sick, but my bank account was a negative number. My pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I said yes. The first night was the longest of my life. I was given a cart, a large gray metal cart, stocked with bottles of chemicals that smelled harsh and artificial, with rags, a mop, a bucket. The uniform was a pair of stiff dark blue pants and a shirt with a logo on the breast. I put it on in a locker room that smelled of old sweat and bleach. My hands shook. I pushed the cart into the elevator, and instead of pressing 32, I pressed B for basement to start my rounds. The initial shame was all-consuming. I'd be on my hands and knees, scrubbing a stain off the linoleum in a kitchenette, and I'd hear the echo of heels clicking down the hall. I'd freeze, hoping they wouldn't turn the corner. I was a ghost. I was invisible. The people who worked there, the people I used to be, they looked right through me. Their eyes would slide over me, as if I were part of the furniture, a necessary but unnoticed fixture. I'd hear them talking, laughing, complaining about their bonuses, their demanding, clients, their problems. Which would have been my problems now felt like a play I was watching from the wings. I was cleaning up their coffee spills, their discarded lunch, wrappers, the evidence of their lives. And I hated it. I hated every second I'd go home, as the sun was rising my clothes, smelling of disinfectant, and I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling feeling a despair, so deep I thought it would swallow me. A strange thing started to happen after a few weeks. The rhythm of the work began to change. The repetitive motion of pushing the mop back and forth, the sweeping, the wiping, it started to quiet the noise in my head, the constant screaming monologue of my failure, my resentment, my fear. It began to recede. It was replaced by a simple physical cadence, swish, swish. With the mop, the squeak of the wheels on my cart, the hum of the fluorescent lights, at 3 in the morning. It became a kind of meditation. My mind, which had been a tangled knot of strategies and anxieties, began to unravel. It went quiet. In that quiet, I started to really see I wasn't just cleaning spaces, I was observing them. I saw the stressed-out junior analyst, who stayed late every night, the piles of papers on his desk, growing the frantic scribbling on his whiteboard. I saw the secret romance between two accountants who thought no one noticed their lingering touches, by the copier. I saw the team manager, who secretly ate his dinner alone in his office, staring at a family photo on his desk. I saw the petty jealousies, the quiet acts of kindness, the exhaustion, the ambition. I was seeing the truth of the place, the human machinery that I had once tried to manage from a distance. I was no longer a part of it, I was a witness. The day I walked into that building for the last time as a janitor, I was wearing my old suit. It was a little loose on me now. I didn't have an appointment. I walked right past the receptionist, who didn't even recognize me, and into Todd's office. He looked up annoyed, and then did a double take. "Do I know you?" he asked. And the work itself, the simple act of making something clean, there was a dignity in it I had never considered. At the end of my shift, I could look down a long, polished hallway and see the results of my labor. It was tangible, it was honest. There was no corporate spin, no hidden agenda. Dirty floor became a clean floor. It was a small, complete thing. That feeling, that small satisfaction, started to become more important than the shame. The thought I am better than this job slowly dissolved. It was replaced by a new question, a quieter one: what is this job trying to teach me? The answer was humility, not the humiliation I had felt at first, but a true grounding humility. I was learning that my value wasn't in my title or my bank account. It was in my ability to show up, to do a necessary task with care, to be of service. I was learning to listen, not to respond, but just to understand. My ego, which had been this loud, demanding thing, was finally silent. And in that silence, my vision became incredibly clear. I started to see the business itself with a clarity I never had from the third IceCon floor. From down in the trenches, pushing my cart, I saw the operational inefficiencies not as abstract problems in a report, but as tangible daily frustrations. I saw how a poorly designed supply closet wasted 15 minutes of every employee's day. I saw how the toxic culture of one department was creating a ripple effect of sick days and low morale. I saw where money was being wasted on flashy, useless software, while the basic tools people needed to do their jobs were outdated and broken. I saw the whole ecosystem, not as a balance sheet, but as a living, breathing organism that was sick, and I knew with a calm certainty how to heal it. The idea didn't come as a lightning bolt of ambition, it was a scheme to get my old life back. It emerged slowly, naturally, from this new understanding. It was a vision of a company that worked for the people in it, not the other way around, a place where efficiency served compassion, not just profit. And I realized I was perhaps the only person who could see it, because I was the only one who had seen it from the very bottom looking up. My life had become incredibly simple. I had no expensive habits, no debt, no need for status symbols. My janitor's salary, which had once felt like an insult, was now more than enough. I lived minimally, peacefully, and without any grand plan. I started to save. Every dollar I didn't spend on the trappings of my old life went into a savings account. It wasn't for a new car or a vacation, it was just accumulating with a peaceful purpose. The amount grew slowly, steadily, and one day I did the math. Combined with the small severance I'd managed to protect from the bankruptcy, it was enough for a down payment, enough to make an offer. The decision to act wasn't driven by a desire for revenge or a need to prove myself. It felt like the next logical step, like turning a page. It was calm confident. I hired a lawyer, a quiet, efficient man, who didn't ask too many questions. We structured the offer, it was fair, it was serious, the company was struggling more than anyone on the outside. Knew my offer was a lifeline. The day the sale was finalized, I walked into the building not as a janitor, but as the owner. I didn't make a grand entrance. I went to my old locker, changed into a simple, clean pair of pants and a button-down shirt. I called an all-hands meeting. The confusion in the room was palpable. They saw me and their brains, short-circuited. The man who pushed the mop was standing at the front of the conference room. I saw the fear in their eyes, especially in the eyes of the executives who had once been my peers. They expected it. "You know of me," I said. "I need to see Mr. Reynolds right now." Purge. They expected vengeance. I spoke quietly. I told them I had spent the last 2 years learning about this company, not from the top down, but from the ground up. I told them I had seen their dedication, their frustrations, their quiet triumphs. I said there would be no firings. Instead, we were going to rebuild, we were going to fix the broken processes, we were going to create a culture where people felt seen and valued. The silence in the room was absolute. And then it wasn't silence anymore, it was a wave of relief, of cautious hope. The former mockers, the people who had looked right through me, are now my most dedicated employees. They are not afraid of me, they are inspired. We transformed the place together. The profit followed not as a primary goal, but as a natural consequence of a healthy, functioning organization. I still go down to the basement, sometimes ill, push a cart for an hour, maybe help clean a particularly messy kitchen. It keeps me grounded, it reminds me where I came from, it reminds me that the most valuable things aren't bought high up in corner offices. They are earned on your hands and knees, in the quiet humility of service. I had to lose everything, every last shred of the person I thought I was, to find the person I was meant to be. I had to become nothing to finally become something real. The whole thing started, as most catastrophes do, with my friends, and a round of drinks. We were at our usual spot, complaining about the usual things: relationships, the soul-crushing nature of modern employment. Mark, who had just gotten a promotion he absolutely did not deserve, was pontificating about adult responsibility. And he turned to me, the eternal freelancer, the king of the side hustle. "You," he said, pointing a finger that was a little too steady for my liking, "you've never had a real job, a 9 to 5 with a W-2 form and a sad-looking desk plant." I defended my honor. "I've had plenty of jobs. I've been a dog walker for anxious poodles, a substitute trivia night host, a guy who stands outside a new restaurant with a sign that says grand opening. These are all vital roles in the ecosystem." But they were having none of it. So the dare was issued, the bet. 1 month I had to get a real job, hold it for 1 month. And the loser, well, the loser had to pay for a very, very expensive dinner for the whole group. The stakes were astronomical. My pride and my wallet were on the line. The next day, fueled by a questionable hangover and a stubborn refusal to lose, I started looking. And there it was, like a beacon from the universe, mocking me. Janitorial assistant, wanted, no experience necessary. It was perfect. It was so far beneath what they expected that it was almost brilliant. I'd show them a real job. I'd show them the underbelly of the economy. The interview was a masterpiece of improvisation. It was for a small, slightly shabby office building that housed a company called Synergistic Dynamics, which sounded like it did nothing at all. The manager, a man named Gary, who had the energy of a deflating balloon, looked at my resume. He started to protest, but I just walked past him down the hall to the corner office. I opened the door without knocking. Reynolds was on the phone. He looked up, furious. "What is the meaning of this security? It says here you were a canine motivational consultant," he said, not even looking up. "I got results," I said with a straight face. "The poodles were particularly inspired." He sighed a long, weary sound. "Look, the last guy quit because he said the mop bucket was haunted. Can you start Monday?" And just like that, I showed up on Monday in what I imagined a janitor would wear, a pair of coveralls I bought at a surplus store that were about 3 sizes too big. I looked less like a maintenance professional and more like a child who had raided his grandfather's closet. My first task was to clean the break room. Simple, right? I managed to knock over the industrial-sized coffee maker, creating a caffeinated tidal wave that swept across the linoleum. Then, while trying to clean that up, I got the handle of the mop stuck in the ceiling tile grid. I was just standing there holding a mop that was dangling from the ceiling When a woman from accounting walked in, she stared at the scene, the flood of coffee, the mop hanging like a bizarre modern art installation, me covered in brown splotches. She didn't say a word, she just poured her coffee, gave me a slow, deliberate blink, and walked out. That was my introduction to the staff of Synergistic Dynamics. They didn't see me as a threat, I was the court jester, the comic relief. They'd walk by and say things like, "Hey, try not to vacuum up any important cables today," or "Remember the windows are on the outside of the building." I leaned into it. I'd salute them with my toilet brush. It was all part of the joke. But the beautiful thing about being a complete nonentity, a harmless fool, is that people forget you're there. They have full-blown confidential conversations 3 feet away from you, while you're pretending to struggle with a dustpan. I became a fly on the wall, a very clumsy, occasionally sticky fly. I learned everything. I learned that Brenda in marketing was having an affair with Dave from logistics, and their secret code was asking if the TPS reports were synced. I learned that the company was bleeding money because Gary, the manager, had invested a huge chunk of their capital in what he called a sure thing, which turned out to be a company that sold artisanal gluten-free printer ink. It was a disaster. The entire place was a soap opera teetering on the edge of a financial cliff, and I had a front row. That's it. The best part was they started asking me for advice, not because they thought I was smart, but because they thought my answers would be hilarious. Gary would wander by looking stressed. I placed my proposal on his desk, not the greasy notebook, but a formal bound document next to it. I placed my janitorial ID badge. "My name is on the cover," I said, "and I'm here to make an offer for everything. The investors are asking about our third-quarter projections. What should I tell them?" I'd lean on my mop. "Tell them you've discovered a revolutionary new market, underwater basket weaving for squirrels. It's untapped." He'd chuckle, shake his head, and walk away. But then a week later, he came back looking stunned. "You're not going to believe this. I pitched that squirrel thing as a metaphor for niche markets, and they loved it. They said it showed vision." This happened again and again. I told the IT guy to try turning the server off and then on again, but with more feeling, maybe a little dramatic flair. It fixed a week-long crash. It was a series of comedic coincidences that somehow built me a bizarre reputation as an eccentric genius, a savant, who hid his brilliance behind a terrible grasp of basic cleaning. Then the roof caved in, figuratively, though at that point, literally wouldn't have surprised me. The artisanal ink deal collapsed completely. The investors pulled out. Gary had a full-blown meltdown in the main office right by the water cooler I was supposed to be disinfecting. "It's over," he wailed. "We're finished. I should just sell the whole mess for scrap." Everyone was panicking. Papers were flying. It was chaos, and Gary, in his desperation, looked right at me. I was just standing there holding a bottle of glass cleaner. He threw his hands up in the air. "Maybe you should buy the place. You're the only one who ever has a decent idea around here." The room went quiet. All eyes were on me, and I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the fumes from the cleaner. Maybe it was the memory of Mark's smug face. But I heard my own voice, clear and surprisingly steady, say, "Okay, how about $500? I meant it as a joke, a continuation of the bit, but Gary's eyes widened. He didn't laugh, he stared at me, and I saw a terrifying calculation happening behind his eyes. The silence stretched out, then he said, "You're serious?" The office manager, a guy named Todd who had a handshake like a dead fish, barely looked at me. He just shoved a key ring and a cart loaded with chemicals and mops at me. "Supply closets, down the hall, east wing. Don't touch anything on the desks," he said, his eyes already back on his computer screen. "And make sure you get the scuff marks off the floor." In accounting, the last guy was useless. That was my welcome. That was my entry point. It was a step down from where I was standing. It felt like a freefall. The color drained from his face. He hung up the phone. He looked from the badge to my face, and the recognition slowly dawned in his eyes. It wasn't just recognition. It was horror, the humiliation. The man he'd walked past 100 times, the man he'd probably complained to about a dirty spot on his floor, was standing here offering to buy his life's work. He stammered. He tried to laugh it off. "This is a joke, get out." My mouth was dry and a firm handshake. He walked over, grabbed my hand, one not holding the Windexan, shook it vigorously. "Done, it's yours. The debt, the lease, the haunted mop bucket, it's all yours. I am free." And he just left. He walked out of the office, and I never saw him again. I stood there in the sudden profound silence. The glass cleaner felt very cold in my hand. I looked around at the faces of the employees. Brenda, Dave the IT guy. They weren't laughing anymore, they were staring at me with a mixture of horror and hope. I had just bought a company, I became a janitor for a dare, and I accidentally became the CEO. The first week was pure unadulterated panic. I had no idea how to run a business. My first executive decision was to replace the terrible burnt coffee with a proper espresso machine. My second was to declare Friday's optional pajama day. The employees, God bless them, decided to roll with it. They were so tired of Gary's stressful management that my bizarre laid-back approach was a breath of fresh air. We had a meeting about the failing synergistic dynamics business model. I sat at the head of the table, still in my slightly too big coveralls. So I said, what is it we actually do here? There was an awkward silence. Finally Brenda spoke up. Well, we used to do third-party logistics for small sporting goods companies, but that kind of dried up. I thought about it. Do we like doing that? Everyone shook their heads. It's not a joke, I said, my voice calm. I opened the document to a specific page. Your freight elevator is a massive liability. It costs you 12 man-hours a week in lost productivity. Your paper consumption is 40% above the industry average, because your digital workflow is a disaster, which I outline on page 7, and your sales team has a 60% turnover rate, because of a toxic manager named Ben, which I detail on page 12. My offer is firm, it's 30%. Okay, I said, what do we like, what are we good at? The IT guy said he was really good at building gaming PCs. Brenda confessed she had a side business, making incredible hot sauce. Dave was a whiz at building furniture. It turned out the whole company was a bunch of people with amazing hidden talents stuck in a job they hated. So we pivoted, we became a hybrid coworking space and creative incubator. We used the office space to help people launch their side projects. We called it the Accidental Company. And it worked because for the first time people were actually excited to come to work. The energy was positive, chaotic, and weirdly productive. The people who used to laugh at me, the ones who saw me as the joke janitor, became my most loyal team. They knew I wasn't some business genius, they knew I had stumbled into this. But they also saw that I trusted them, that I valued their actual skills over some corporate nonsense. We're not a Fortune 500 company, but we're profitable, we're happy, and every month, when I sign the paychecks, I have to stop myself from laughing. I'm still waiting for someone to jump out and yell, gotcha. The moral of the story, if there is one, isn't about hard work or perseverance. It's about not taking yourself so seriously. Success didn't find me because I had a 5-year plan, it found me because I took a stupid dare, wore ridiculously large coveralls, and wasn't afraid to look like a fool. Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones you never see coming, the ones you literally mop your way into. And the most valuable thing you can have isn't an MBA, it's a good sense of humor and the ability to hold a conversation with a haunted mop bucket. They called me sweetheart, they called me honey, and most often they just called me the cleaning lady. I'd be pushing my cart down the hall, the wheels squeaking on the polished concrete, and I'd hear the murmurs from the glass-walled offices. It was a world of sharp suits and sharper egos, a venture capital firm, where money moved like lightning and voices were always a little too loud. And I was the ghost, the one who emptied the trash cans and wiped down the whiteboards, erasing the evidence of their day. I had an MBA, graduated top of my class, but when I walked into Sterling Ventures for my first interview, the partner, a man named Robert, spent the entire time looking at my resume and then back at my face as if he couldn't connect the two. He said they were looking for someone with a certain fit, a certain gravitas. He said I should try my luck in marketing or HR. I knew what that meant. This was the deal-making floor. This was where the boys' club gathered, and there were no chairs for women at their table. Below your asking price, but it's more than this business is worth to anyone else, because I am the only one who knows how to fix it. So I took the janitorial job. It was the only way to get past the front desk. It paid the rent barely, and it gave me a keycard that worked after hours. I told myself it was temporary, a foothold, a way to learn the business from the ground up. What I didn't realize was that the ground floor, the literal basement, where the cleaning supplies were kept, gave me the best view in the entire building. Because when you're invisible, people forget you're there. They have conversations they'd never have in a boardroom. I'd be refilling the paper tray in the copier room, and two analysts would be in there complaining about a senior partner's idiotic strategy for a new tech startup. I'd be vacuuming the carpet in the lounge, and I'd overhear a portfolio manager on the phone, desperately trying to cover up a bad investment. I heard the real worries, the unvarnished truth, that never made it into the polished PowerPoint presentations. I saw the cracks in the foundation. And I saw the culture, the way the young male associates were mentored, taken to long lunches, introduced to important clients. The women, the few there were given administrative work, or shuffled into supporting roles. Their ideas were acknowledged with a nod, and then forgotten. I watched one woman, Sarah in analytics, present a brilliant data model. The managing director, a man named Davies, patted her on the shoulder and said, "Thanks, sweetie, well, take it from here then." He handed the model to a junior male associate to run with. I saw the defeat in her eyes. I felt it in my own. During the day, I'd clean. At night, I'd work. I'd sit at a deserted desk, my cart parked nearby, and I'd open my laptop. I built financial models of my own. I analyzed every company in Sterling's portfolio. I tracked their investments, their failures, their missed opportunities. I saw a pattern. They were obsessed with flashy headline-grabbing tech, but they were ignoring a whole sector of stable industrial companies that were ripe for modernization. They were chasing the next big app, while the real money was in boring, essential things like logistics and supply chain management. I started talking to people, not the partners in their offices, but the other invisible people. I became friends with Maria, the head of IT. She showed me the real tech infrastructure, the shaky servers that held all their precious data. I talked to Ben, the security guard, who knew more about the comings and goings of every client than anyone. I built a network in the shadows. We were the ones who kept the lights on, while the men in suits took the credit. I wrote a business plan, 100 pages. It was a blueprint for a new kind of fund, one that focused on these undervalued industrial assets. It used data in a way they'd never considered. It was solid, it was smart, and it was undeniable. But I had no platform. I was the cleaning lady. One afternoon, mustering every ounce of courage I had, I printed a summary and slipped it onto Robert's desk. I waited. A week later, I was cleaning his office and found it in his trash. Can he use the back of it to scribble his lunch order? The silence in that room was heavier than any I'd experienced during my night shifts. He didn't laugh. The laughter had finally definitively stopped. He just stared at me, and in his eyes, I saw the dawning realization that I knew his company intimately, more intimately than he ever had. I had seen its guts. I had cleaned them up every night. The frustration was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach to see the path so clearly, and to be blocked by nothing more than perception, by the sheer arrogance of these men, who couldn't see past a title or a gender. It was like screaming into a soundproof room. Then the crisis hit. Sterling Ventures' biggest investment, a flashy social media platform, collapsed overnight. A data privacy scandal that everyone in the IT department had seen coming for months. The losses were catastrophic. Panic spread through the office like a virus. The partners were running around shouting into phones, their faces pale. The board of directors was flying in. The company was on the brink. And I absolutely knew that their plan to save themselves was flawed. They were going to double down on their old strategies, try to pull off a risky merger that would only dig the hole deeper. I tried one last time. I saw Robert rushing down the hall, and I stepped in front of him. "Robert," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "the industrial fund idea. It's the only way out. Their merger plan is going to sink the company." He stopped, looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. He saw my uniform, he saw my name tag. And he smiled, this weary, condescending smile. "Not now, Linda." He said, "The adults are handling this." And he walked away. The adults, that was the moment something in me broke. And then immediately solidified into something harder than steel. I went home that night, and I looked at my savings account. It wasn't much. It was everything I'd scrimped and saved for years. But it was enough for a plane ticket and a nice suit while the partners were in their panic rooms. I was on a red-eye to the East Coast. I used my network. Maria knew which board members were actually tech-savvy. Ben knew their travel schedules. I managed to get a 15-minute meeting with Eleanor Grayson, the most respected and feared member of Sterling's board, a woman who had built her own fortune in an era even more hostile than this one. I walked into her hotel suite. I was no longer in a uniform. I wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. I handed her my business plan. I didn't talk about cleaning bathrooms. I talked about cash flow. I talked about asset valuation. I talked about the blind spots of the current leadership, and I illustrated every point with specific damning examples I'd gathered from my years of silence. I showed her how Sterling was bleeding value, and how my plan wouldn't just save it but would make it stronger than ever. She listened, she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she closed the folder, and looked at me for a long time. "They call you the cleaning lady, don't they?" she said. I just nodded. A small grim smile touched her lips. "It's always a mistake," she said, "to underestimate the woman who knows where the bodies are buried, or, in your case, where the trash is buried." The negotiation was short. He had no leverage. I knew every weakness. A month later, I was sitting in that same office. Now my office, the symbolic moment, was when they handed me the keys, not the little key ring for the supply closets, but the master set brass, heavy, cold. I remember holding them in my hand, the weight of them feeling like justice. The takeover was swift and merciless. When the board convened to vote on the merger, Alina Grayson presented an alternative. She presented my plan, and she presented an offer from a new holding company I had formed, backed by her own capital, to acquire a controlling interest in Sterling Ventures. The partners were stunned. Robert's face, when he saw me walk into the boardroom, not with a cleaning cart, but with a contract, was a picture I will cherish for the rest of my life. It was a mixture of pure shock and dawning horror. The vote was unanimous. They had no choice. My first day as CEO, I didn't fire everyone. That's what they expected, the vengeful woman cleaning house. Instead, I called a company-wide meeting. I stood on the same floor I used to mop, and I looked out at a sea of faces: a terrified old guard, the curious junior staff, the invisible people like Maria and Ben, in the back, trying to hide their smiles. I told them that the old way was over, that from now on promotions would be based on merit, on ideas, on results, that the boys' club was permanently disbanded. I announced the new fund, the one I had designed, and my first official act was to promote Sarah from analytics to be its head. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, from the back, someone started to clap. It was Maria, then Ben, then it spread, until the whole room was filled with a sound that wasn't just applause, but a release of years of pent-up frustration. They called me the cleaning lady. They thought it made me small, but they were wrong. Being invisible taught me everything. It taught me to listen, to observe, to understand the true mechanics of power. It taught me that the greatest strength isn't always being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the quietest, sometimes it's the one everyone ignores, the one who is silently mapping the entire battlefield, while the generals are too busy preening. Now I sign their paychecks, and the only label that matters is the one door to the corner office, mine. Never ever underestimate the woman in the room, no matter what her title appears to be. The first thing I did wasn't some grand gesture. I didn't fire everyone. I called a meeting. I stood in front of the entire staff, the same people who had mocked me. I saw the fear in their eyes. I told them I knew about the problems. I listed them not as accusations, but as facts: the broken elevator, the wasteful paper usage. I told them I also knew about their ideas, the suggestions they'd made that had been ignored. I promoted 3 people that day, people I'd overheard having brilliant, frustrated ideas. In the break room, I fired Ben. I ordered the new software the teams had been begging for. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about perspective. Humility isn't about humiliation. It's about clarity. When you're at the bottom, you have the clearest view of the foundation. You see the cracks everyone else is walking over. Strategy isn't always about charging forward. Sometimes it's about being still and listening and observing. Long-term thinking means being willing to be misunderstood. In the short term, it means embracing the label of janitor, if that label gives you the access you need. They laughed when I cleaned their floors. They thought I was at the bottom. But I was never at the bottom. I was just gathering the intelligence I needed to climb and climb. I did all the way to the top. Sometimes you have to get on your knees to eventually stand taller than anyone else. You have to be willing to touch the dirt to truly understand what it takes to build something clean, something strong, something that lasts. And every time I walk through these halls now, I don't see the scuff marks I used to clean. I see the blueprint, the hustler's blueprint, and it was drawn on my hands and knees. Ridicule started almost immediately. It was subtle at first. I'd walk into a break room to empty the trash, and a conversation would just stop. Then the whispers would start. As I moved on to the next room, I was a ghost. But a ghost they enjoyed mocking. I'd hear them, the junior executives in their cheap suits, that were still better than anything I owned. "Hey, if this consulting gig doesn't work out, I guess we know our fallback plan," one would say. and the others would laugh. They'd leave crumpled napkins and empty. The plane touched down, and everything was gray, a gray sky, gray buildings, a gray sidewalk wet with rain. That's my first memory, this cold gray world. I had one suitcase. Inside that suitcase my whole life was packed into a few photographs, a change of clothes, and a dream so big it felt like it should have burst the seams. Hope. That's all I had. It was a physical weight in my chest, a burning thing that kept me warm when the wind cut through my thin jacket. I remember walking into that building for the first time. It was a tower of glass and steel so tall I had to tilt my head all the way back to see the top. It seemed to scrape the sky. Everyone moved so fast, a river of people in sharp suits, talking on phones, their footsteps clicking in a rhythm I didn't understand. I felt like a ghost. I was there, but I was invisible. My clothes were wrong, my posture was wrong. The few words of English I had practiced on the plane evaporated in my throat. Interview for the janitorial job was in a small windowless room. The man behind the desk didn't look up from my papers. He just grunted, "Night shift. Starts at 10, don't be late." That was it, my first job in America. My hands, which had held books and ideas in my old life, were now going to hold a mop and a bucket. But I wasn't ashamed, not then. It was a foothold, a crack in the door of this giant imposing country. I remember looking at my reflection in the polished lobby floor that first night. I saw a man alone, surrounded by empty desks and silent computers, and I made a silent promise to myself, to that reflection: this is not the end, this is the very beginning. The humiliation was a daily lesson. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just a look. An executive would walk past me while I was emptying a trash bin, and he'd wrinkle his nose like I was part of the garbage, or I'd be cleaning the break room, and a group of young associates would come in, their laughter dying down. As they saw me, they'd speak in low tones, but I heard the words, the cleaner. They never learned my name. The worst was the language. My accent was thick, a heavy reminder of where I came from. I'd try to say good evening, and the words would get tangled. My tongue felt like a foreign object in my mouth. They'd mimic me, not always to my face, but I heard it, the exaggerated sounds, the laughter that followed. One man, his name was Mr. Henderson. He was a vice president. He always had a joke. He'd see me and say something loud like, "Hey, can you clean up this quarterly report?" And his friends would laugh. I'd just nod and smile, that tight, painful smile, the smile that hides a universe of hurt. Inside I was storing every single slight, every mockery. I folded them up neatly and tucked them away in a quiet corner of my mind. They became my fuel. The nights were long. The building was so quiet you could hear the hum of the servers, the faint buzz of the lights. My body ached, my shoulders, my back, my hands cracked from the chemicals. I'd push my cart from floor to floor, a silent pilgrim in a temple of commerce. And I started to see things. I saw the waste. I'd empty the trash cans of the senior managers and see half-eaten $50 lunches thrown away. I'd see memos printed on thick, expensive paper, read once and discarded. I saw the carelessness of money. Carelessness I couldn't even imagine. But I also saw opportunity. They threw away more than just trash, they threw away knowledge. I started collecting the reports from the recycling bins. At first they were just words on a page, financial terms I didn't understand. But I had a dictionary, a small worn paperback I kept in my cart. After I finished my rounds, I'd sit in a custodial closet with a single bare bulb overhead, and I'd read, I'd cross-reference every unknown word, balance sheets, profit and loss statements, market analysis. Coffee cups right next to the trash. Can a little test, I think a little power play. Slowly the numbers started to tell a story. I was learning the anatomy of the business, from the inside out, from the discarded scraps. Sometimes I'd linger near a conference room. If a meeting ran late, I'd pretend to be cleaning the glass door. But I was listening. I heard the strategies, the arguments, the fears of these powerful men. I saw who was sharp and who was just loud. I saw the cracks in their confidence. While they slept in their big houses, I was working. While they dreamed I was studying, my savings account was another kind of education. Every paycheck, I'd take a little and put it away. It was a ritual. I'd deny myself everything, a new pair of shoes, a hot meal from a restaurant. It all went into the account. That number, growing so slowly, was my silent weapon. It was my future. Then the tide turned. I saw it coming before anyone else did. The reports I collected started to tell a darker story. The numbers were getting worse. The memos were more frantic. I'd overhear conversations in the hallway, hushed and worried. Another round of layoffs. The board is unhappy. The arrogance I'd seen for years began to curdle into fear. The laughter in the halls stopped. The air grew thick with anxiety. The day the layoffs hit was a strange one. I saw men in $1,000 suits, carrying cardboard boxes, their eyes blank. With shock, I saw Mr. Henderson, the man who always mocked my accent, walking out of the building. His shoulders slumped. He didn't even see me. The mighty had fallen. The company was spiraling. It was bleeding money. And the people who were supposed to be captains were the first ones abandoning the ship. That's when I knew this was the moment. All those years of scrubbing floors, all those nights of studying, all those dollars saved, it had all been leading to this single point. I went to the public library. I didn't have a computer at home, and I drafted a business plan. It was simple, it was brutal, it was based on everything I had seen them do wrong. I went to a bank. Wearing the one good suit I owned, I laid out my life savings, my plan. And my story. The loan officer was skeptical, but the numbers were solid. They were more solid than anything the current management had. The day of the acquisition meeting, I walked into the boardroom not with a mop, but with a briefcase. The few remaining executives were there, pale and defeated. They looked at me with confusion. Who was this man? When I was introduced as the prospective buyer, the silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The looks on their faces. It wasn't just shock, it was a dawning, horrifying recognition. The janitor, the man they mocked, the invisible man, he was now holding the future of their company and their own fortunes. His hands, the poetic justice of it was so perfect, it was almost painful. I didn't say much, I just presented my offer. It was fair, it was more than fair, and they had no choice but to accept. My first day as the owner, I walked through those same doors, but this time I didn't go to the custodial closet. I went to the corner office on the top floor, the same office where Id spent hours polishing the desk, dusting the shelves. Now it was my desk, my shelves. But I made a decision that first week, a fundamental mindset shift. I stopped hearing insults and started collecting data. Every sneer was a data point on company culture. Every thoughtlessly discarded piece of trash was a clue to employee morale. That dirty floor in accounting wasn't just a dirty floor, it was a map. The heaviest scuff marks were always in a path from the elevator bank to a specific cluster of desks that told me which team was overworked, always rushing in and out the reel. My first act was to look at the list of former employees. I called back every single person who had ever shown me a shred of decency. The security guard, who always said hello, the secretary, who once offered me a cup of coffee on a cold night, the junior analyst, who never treated me like I was beneath her. I offered them their jobs back with better pay. For the others, the ones like Mr. Henderson, I was fair. I assessed them based on their skills, not our past. Some I hired, some I didn't. The point wasn't revenge, the point was building something new. I built a different kind of company, a company where the person cleaning the floor is as respected as the person in the corner office. Because I know that the person cleaning the floor might just be the future owner. We value hard work, we value humility, we value the quiet accumulation of knowledge. These are the values I learned from the bottom. They are the foundation of everything we've built. Sometimes I stand at that big window and look down at the city, the same gray city I arrived in all those years ago. It doesn't look so gray anymore. It looks full of light, full of possibility. The journey from being invisible to being in charge, it wasn't just about buying a company, it was about earning the right to lead it. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of a quiet, relentless grind. So if you're out there, and you're starting from nothing, if you feel invisible, if they mock your accent, or your clothes, or your job, remember this: your current situation is not your destination. It is your training ground. Every humiliation is a lesson. Every long night is an investment. Save your money, sharpen your mind, store your ambition away like a secret weapon. And when the opportunity comes, and it will come, you will be ready, not with loud words, but with silent, undeniable action. The dream is real, but you have to be willing to scrub the floors to reach it. The whole idea started in a coffee shop, actually. I was reading their annual report on my laptop, a billion-dollar company, a household name for generations. And their financials were a mess, not a messy mess, not on the surface. The numbers added up. But the patterns were all wrong. It was like watching a master pianist play with two fingers. The potential was there screaming, but the execution was archaic. They were bleeding money through 1,000 tiny, inefficient cuts. I became obsessed. I'd lie in bed at night and just see the data streams, the lag times in their supply chain, the redundancy in their customer service protocols. Their entire digital infrastructure was a castle built on sand, and they kept adding more turrets instead of fixing the foundation. I tried the normal channels first. I wrote a white paper. I sent it to their investor relations department. I got a polite automated response. I even managed to get a call with a junior executive. He sounded bored. He kept using phrases like legacy integration and stakeholder buy-in. He didn't get it, they were all trapped inside the system, and they couldn't see the walls. That's when the janitor idea hit me. It was so absurd, it was brilliant, their digital fortifications were weak. But their corporate culture was a fortress. They'd never listen to an outsider, a young kid telling them how to run their business. But if I could get inside not as a consultant, but as a ghost, someone invisible, I needed to see the machine from the ground up, not from a boardroom presentation. I needed to understand the analog heart of the beast, the paper that got printed, signed, filed. And gold, though, was in the silence. After everyone had gone home, that's when the building started to talk to me. Forgotten the conversations in the break room, the way information really flowed, not the way it was supposed to on an org chart. So I applied for a night shift janitorial position. The interview was in a cramped HR office with fluorescent lights that hummed. The manager looked tired. He asked me if I had experience with industrial floor buffers. I said I was a quick learner. He hired me on the spot. My uniform was a pair of stiff dark blue coveralls. They felt like a costume. The first night pushing my cart into the main headquarters was surreal. The silence was different from the silence of my apartment. It was a heavy, empty silence punctuated by the hum of servers and the distant beep of a security system. I had a master key. I could go anywhere. The first few weeks were just observation. I learned the rhythms of the building, which executives worked late, which departments were the messiest, which meant they were the most chaotic, empty trash bins, and find treasure troves, scribbled notes on napkins, early drafts of reports that were later sanitized, printouts of emails that were a lot more candid than the official memos. I saw the physical network. The filing cabinets in the marketing department were a disaster, a physical manifestation of their disjointed campaigns. The accounting floor had a whole room dedicated to paper invoices, a system that hadn't been updated since the 90s. I'd vacuum the carpets outside the CEO's office, and just listen. His door was always slightly ajar when he worked late. I heard him on the phone, frustrated, talking about board pressure and quarterly expectations. He was a smart man, but he was fighting the symptoms, not the disease. The real power, I quickly learned, wasn't with the executives. It was with a few key middle managers, a woman named Brenda in logistics, who knew every truck driver by name and could reroute a shipment with a single phone call, an older guy, Frank, in it, who kept the whole aging system running with sheer force of will, and a collection of ancient code. He refused to document. These were the people who actually made the company run. They were the pillars holding up a crumbling ceiling. I started building my plan not on a computer at first, but in a small physical notebook I kept in my coverall pocket. I'd jot down observations. The three-way window every morning, where the entire shipping department waited for a single server to reboot the massive waste from overordering, because their inventory system was 48 hours behind reality. The customer service reps, who had to toggle between 5 different ancient programs to solve a simple problem. I was mapping the organism's nervous system, and I was finding all the places where the signals got crossed, where the synapses failed. At home after my shift, I'd translate these notes into code, into models, into a new operating system. I designed a unified software platform that would replace their dozen fragmented systems. I built an AI-driven logistics model that could cut their shipping times in half. I created a customer relationship management tool that was actually intuitive. My plan wasn't just a tech upgrade. It was a complete business transformation, built from the ground up with an intimacy no consultant could ever. While I pushed my mop bucket down the endless dark corridors, I wasn't just cleaning. I was conducting an audit. They were paying me to perform. I saw the operational inefficiencies firsthand. The freight elevator that groaned and shuddered, taking 5 minutes to go down 2 floors. I noted the pallets of branded promotional items, useless expensive trinkets sitting in a locked storage room, covered in a thick layer of dust, a complete waste of capital. I saw the mountains of paper. They still used the archaic achieve. I knew which departments would resist, which old-timers would need extra training, which workflows could be automated, and which needed a human touch. I knew it all because I'd seen it. I'd cleaned their coffee stains and swept up their frustration. Then the crisis hit. It was inevitable, a major cybersecurity breach. Nothing I did, of course. Their systems were just that weak. Customer data was exposed. The stock price plummeted. The news channels were having a field day. The building was in a panic. I remember pushing my cart past the C-suite offices. And the air was thick with fear. You could smell it. All the flaws I had identified were now exposed for the world to see. The company was on its knees. That was my moment. I didn't go through investor relations. This time, I used what I knew. I found the personal email address of the lead independent director on the board, a woman known for being pragmatic and ruthless. I sent her a cold, data-driven proposal. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a forensic analysis. I outlined every single weakness, every point of failure. And I attached my complete business plan. As the solution, I showed her exactly how my system would not only fix the current crisis but make the company stronger and more profitable than it had ever been. I made an offer to acquire a controlling stake. My price was a fraction of what the company was worth a month before, but it was a fair price for a failing asset. The silence that followed was louder than any vacuum cleaner. For 3 days, nothing. I kept going to work, emptying the bins, wiping down the surfaces. The panic had subsided into a grim acceptance. Then I got the response, a request for a meeting, not a video call, a face-to-face meeting in the boardroom. Walking in there out of my coveralls, and into a simple suit I'd bought for the occasion, was the strangest feeling of my life. The board members were all there, the CEO looking defeated, the lead director, the woman I'd emailed. She just watched me, her eyes sharp. They had no idea who I was. I introduced myself. I saw the confusion on their faces. Then I said, I am the one who sent you the proposal. And for the last 6 months, I've been your night janitor. The shock in the room was a physical thing. You could feel the temperature drop. The CEO started to say something, to protest. But the lead director cut him off. She just said, explain. So I did. For the next hour, I walked them through my plan. I didn't use jargon. I used their own language. I talked about the filing cabinet in marketing. I mentioned the morning server reboot in shipping. I described Frank in IT and his undocumented code. I showed them that I didn't just understand their business, I understood their building. I knew it better than they did. The acquisition wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a logical inevitability. They had the assets, but I had the intelligence, the new operating system. The merger was just sense. They accepted the offer. It was all very clinical, very quiet. The paperwork was signed within a week. The first day, as the new owner, I didn't hold a press conference. I called an all-hands meeting in the main atrium. The entire staff was there, from the executives to the day shift janitors. They were all looking at me, this young stranger. I saw Brenda from logistics. I saw Frank from IT. I saw the tired manager who'd hired me. I stood up there, and I didn't talk about profit margins or market share. I talked about the 3-hour shipping delay. I talked about the 5 different software programs. I talked about the things they all complained about every day. I saw the recognition dawn on their faces. This guy knew, he really knew. I laid out the new plan. We were going to rebuild from the ground up. We were going to streamline, automate, and empower. I wasn't there to fire people. I was there to fix the machine, so they could do their jobs without the filing systems. I'd run my finger along the top of a cubicle wall, and it would come away gray with dust. But the expensive modern light fixtures above would be spotless. They cared about the appearance, the surface-level shine for clients. But the infrastructure was rotting from neglect. Constant friction. I looked at Frank, and I said, your knowledge is invaluable. We're going to document it. And then we're going to build a system that honors it instead of fighting it. I saw him stand a little taller. The moral wasn't about revenge or even about money. It was about a simple, pure truth. True intelligence isn't just about having the smartest idea. It's about understanding the ecosystem where that idea has to live. It's about humility. You have to be willing to push a mop, to empty the trash, to become a part of the system, before you can ever hope to change at the highest level of strategy. Sometimes starts on your hands and knees with a rag and a bucket, simply watching and learning. The noise in the restaurant was a low, polite hum, crystal glasses clinking against fine china, the sound of money being comfortable. I sat there at our usual table, the one by the window overlooking the city. My father was at the head, my uncle to his right, my older brother to his left. I was always on the periphery. Even when I was in the room, I was on the outside. My father was talking about the quarterly reports. The company, our family's legacy, was doing well. He said it with a kind of finality, like he was reading a eulogy for a year that had been good to him. Then he turned to me. His eyes, the same shade of gray as mine, had no warmth in them. They were assessing calculating like I was a column of figures that didn't quite add up. He said, "We've been discussing your future, your continued role." My brother gave a slight, almost imperceptible smirk into his napkin. I knew what was coming. Id felt it for years, the subtle dismissals in meetings, the ideas I proposed that were suddenly mysteriously flawed. The way my uncle would clap me on the back a little too hard and call me the philosopher instead of the vice president. "We think," my father continued, his voice flat, "that your vision for the company is sentimental. It lacks the necessary ruthlessness. This expansion into the emerging markets, the focus on sustainable materials, it's a distraction, a costly one." I felt my jaw tight. "It's the future, Dad. The competitors are already moving in that direction. If we don't adapt, we'll be left behind. We're building a house on a foundation that's starting to crack." My brother couldn't stay quiet any longer. "We're not building a house. We're running a corporation. We sell what people want to buy now, not what they might want in 10 years. That's the difference between a businessman and a dreamer." The word dreamer hung in the air between us. Sour and condescending, it was the family's favorite word for me, the black sheep, the failure, the one who didn't grasp the simple, brutal logic of profit. The argument escalated. It wasn't loud, not in that place. It was a quiet, vicious dismantling. They weren't just disagreeing with my proposal, they were dismantling my character. My father finally stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed room. And I listened. Oh, I listened. When you're invisible, people say things they forget. You're there. Id be wiping down the sink in the executive washroom, and 2 VPs would come in talking about the third quarter projections. Id be vacuuming the carpet outside the conference room, and hear the CEO, a man named Reynolds, yelling at his sales director about missed targets. I learned which managers were respected and which were despised. I heard the genuine complaints about a new software system that was costing a. "This is my company," he said, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of our table. "It was built on discipline, on making hard choices. You don't have the stomach for it. You're a soft, you always have been." He took a long, slow sip of his wine. "Effective immediately. Your position is terminated. Your shares will be bought out at the current valuation. And until you can prove you understand what it means to actually work for a living, to get your hands dirty, you are no longer welcome at the family table." The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. They all just looked at me, my uncle, my brother, my father. There was no anger left, just a cold, unanimous verdict. I was being disowned, not just from the company, but from the family. The name Id carried my whole life was being stripped from me right there, between the appetizer and the main course. I stood up, my legs felt weak. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? I walked out of that restaurant, and the door closed behind me with a final muffled thud. The city lights blurred. I had nothing, no job, no family, just a bank account with a buyout that felt like blood money. The money didn't last long. Pride is an expensive thing to maintain when you have no income. I rented a small, bleak apartment on the wrong side of the city. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbors arguing, the traffic constant. It was a world away from the quiet, carpeted halls I'd known. I needed a job, any job. I scanned the classifieds, my face burning with shame. Management positions, required references. I couldn't get my own family would blacklist me. Then I saw it, a simple stark ad: janitorial staff, wanted, night shift, no experience necessary. I showed up at the address. It was a massive, gleaming office, building the headquarters of Apex Dynamics, our most direct and ruthless competitor. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical cut. I was hired on the spot. The uniform was a dark blue jumpsuit, coarse against my skin. The first night I was given a mop and a bucket, and shown the bathrooms. The humiliation was a living thing, the smell of ammonia and bleach, the cold, wet tile under my knees, scrubbing toilets that strangers had used. I thought about my father in his custom-tailored suit, in his corner office on the top floor of our building. I thought about my brother, and a cold, hard knot began to form in my stomach. This wasn't just survival, this was my new university. The mocking phone calls started. My brother mostly heard. "You've found your true calling," he'd say, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Finally getting your hands dirty. Must be so grounding." My mother called. Once her voice strained. "Your father is just so disappointed. If you just apologize, come to your senses." Id just listen." The phone pressed to my ear, my knuckles white. I stopped answering after a while. But on my hands and knees in the quiet of the night, I started to learn I wasn't just cleaning toilets. I was invisible. I saw the internal memos left on desks forgotten by executives rushing out. I saw the project timelines on whiteboards, the frantic revisions. I saw the waste, the staggering inefficiency. Apex was lean, aggressive, and smart. They were doing everything my father's company was too arrogant to consider they were my father's worst nightmare. And I was their janitor.